The trouble started on a humid July morning 3 months ago when I stepped onto my front porch and saw Karen Davis, my neighbor and the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, glaring at my newest creation. I'd spent weeks welding a 3-foot metal sculpture of a beehive, its hexagonal cells glinting in the sun to celebrate my apiary near the creek that bordered my property. The creek, part of a shared easement, was my pride. Its burbling water fed my bees and my soul. The sculpture, planted firmly on my side of the boundary, was my way of claiming this space, a quiet rebellion against the HOA's sterile rules. Karen, in her pressed khakis and clipboard, had other ideas. She'd been eyeing the creek for months, muttering about community improvements at HOA meetings. That morning she marched across my lawn, her sensible loafers sinking into the dew-soaked grass, and declared my sculpture was on her property. "This eyesore over the line," she snapped, pointing at an imaginary boundary. "Move it, or I'll have it removed." I dealt with Karen's power trips before, her fines for unapproved mailbox colors, her lectures about grass height, but this was new. The boundary wasn't imaginary. I had a surveyor's map filed with the county showing my property extended to the creek's edge. I invited her inside, spread the map on my kitchen table, and traced the line with a steady finger. "See, my land, my sculpture." Karen's lips pursed, her platinum blonde bob quivering. "We'll see about that," she said, storming out. By noon, she'd hammered metal posts into the ground, stringing wire to block my creek path. The fence cut through my sculpture's shadow, a deliberate insult. I grabbed my phone, snapped photos, and called the county clerk to confirm the easement's status. Public record, no one could block access. Karen's fence was illegal. I knocked on her door, papers in hand, hoping to de-escalate. Her husband, a quiet man who avoided HOA drama, answered. "She's at a board meeting," he mumbled, eyeing the documents. I left a copy with a polite note asking her to remove the posts. The next morning, the fence stood taller, reinforced with rebar. My note was crumpled in her recycling bin. Pixel, my border collie, sensed my frustration, nudging my hand as I stared at the creek. The sculpture, its steel warmed by the sun, seemed to hum with defiance. I wasn't backing down. I called a lawyer friend, Elliot, who advised me to file a formal complaint but warned Karen might escalate. "HOA types like her don't quit," he said. He was right. 2 days later, Karen upped the ante. I was pruning my lavender when a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Deputy Rogers, a lanky man with a no-nonsense drawl, stepped out, adjusting his hat. Karen trailed him, arms crossed, smirking. "He's trespassing," she said, pointing at me. "That's sculpture on my land, and he's been harassing me about my fence." My stomach churned, but I kept calm. Pixel sat at my feet, tail thumping, as I handed Rogers my survey map, the county easement records, and photos of Karen's fence. "This is my property," I said. "The creek's open access. Her posts are illegal." Rogers skimmed the documents, his eyes flicking to the sculpture, then the fence. He walked the boundary, boots crunching gravel, and stopped where Karen's rebar pierced my soil. "Ma'am," he said, turning to her, "these records check out. This ain't your land, and this fence violates the easement. You'll need to remove it." Karen's face reddened, her clipboard trembling. "This is outrageous. I'm protecting the neighborhood's value." Rogers raised an eyebrow. "Have a pleasant day, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. He nodded to me. "You're good, sir. Call if she tries anything else." As Rogers drove off, I exhaled, stroking Pixel's fur. The sculpture caught the light, its edges sharp against the sky. I thought that was the end. Karen, however, wasn't done. Her smirk had vanished, replaced by a cold stare that promised retaliation. I later learned from a neighbor that Rogers had been watching Karen for weeks, fielding complaints about her HOA bullying, fines issued without votes, meetings held in secret. She'd called 911 on my art, unaware the cops were already circling her. That night I sat by the creek, the water's murmur blending with the bees' hum. The sculpture stood proud, but I felt a knot in my gut. Karen's defeat wasn't closure, it was a spark. I moved the sculpture closer to my porch just in case and ordered motion sensor cameras. Whatever came next, I'd be ready. 2 weeks after Deputy Rogers sent Karen packing, I returned from a hardware store run to a scene that turned my stomach. My wire fence along the creek lay in tatters, cut clean in 3 places, its posts bent like broken bones. Deep tire marks gouged the mud near the water, and one of my beehives, 20 feet from my cherished metal beehive sculpture, lay smashed, its wooden frame splintered, honey oozing into the grass like spilled gold. The air buzzed with frantic bees, their hum a desperate plea. Worst of all, Pixel, my border collie, limped toward me, whimpering, a rusty nail embedded in her paw from a crude nailboard hidden in the wreckage. I knelt beside her, heart pounding, and gently pried the nail free, blood welling in her fur. The vet's visit cost $200 with antibiotics and a warning to watch for infection. As Pixel rested on her bed, her eyes dulled by pain, my shock hardened into fury. This wasn't just vandalism, it was personal. Karen had crossed a line and I was done playing nice. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras, the kind that ping your phone every 10 seconds until silenced, and had them overnighted. I also called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for precision and a no-nonsense glare that could stop a bulldozer. By the next afternoon, Nora was on my land, her boots crunching the gravel as she drove fluorescent orange stakes into the ground, marking my property's corners. She stapled laminated placards to each stake, bold text warning of criminal penalties for tampering with survey monuments. "Let's see them try to mess with this," she said, handing me a copy of her certified map. That night I barely slept, my phone propped on the nightstand, waiting for the camera's alerts. At 1:13 a.m. it lit up, buzzing like an angry hive. The live feed showed 2 figures skulking by the creek, their hoodies blending with the shadows. One wielded bolt cutters, snapping Nora's stakes with practiced ease, while the other, shorter with platinum blonde hair spilling from her hood, tossed the stakes into the gurgling water. The moonlight caught the taller figure's face, a fleeting grimace of effort. I didn't need facial recognition software. I saved the footage and called Deputy Rogers at dawn. Rogers arrived by 7 a.m., his cruiser kicking up dust. I showed him the video, the tire marks, the ruined hive, and Pixel's bandaged paw. He squinted at the screen, then nodded. "That's Chandler Hayes," he said, recognizing the man with the bolt cutters. "Local troublemaker on probation for fraud, and that blonde, no mistaking Karen Davis." I learned later that Rogers had been quietly building a file on Karen, thanks to neighbors, complaints about her HOA strong-arming, unpermitted fines, forged meeting notes. She'd called 911 on my sculpture, oblivious that Rogers was already watching her. He secured a warrant for criminal mischief and trespassing. By 8 a.m., he and 2 deputies knocked on Chandler's door, a rundown duplex across town. Body cam footage, which I saw weeks later, captured Chandler in sagging pajama pants, insisting he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up a still from my camera, Chandler mid-grimace, bolt cutters gleaming. Chandler's jaw dropped, words failing him. Karen's arrest was less dramatic, but just as damning. Rogers found the stolen stakes in her garage, stacked beside Nora's laminated placards and a can of red spray paint, the same shade defacing my no trespassing signs. Karen claimed Chandler stored tools there without her knowledge, but her flustered stammer betrayed her. Rogers wasn't buying it. Both were hauled to county jail. Karen posted bond by noon, her attorney already spinning excuses. Chandler, tethered by his 2021 check-kiting probation, stayed locked up, a no-bond hold pending review. I stood by my sculpture, its dented hexagons catching the morning light, and felt a grim satisfaction. Pixel napped in the shade, her paw healing. The bees, rehoused in a new hive, hummed softly. Karen thought she'd break me, but my cameras had turned her ambush into evidence. Rogers tipped his hat as he left. "Keep those cameras on," he said. "I plan to." A month after Karen and Chandler's arrests, the air on my property felt lighter, but the fight was far from over. My metal beehive sculpture, now sporting a dent from a stray piece of rebar, stood sentinel by the porch, its steel hexagons catching the late August sun. Pixel's paw had healed, her playful bounds along the creek a daily reminder of what I was protecting. Yet Karen's shadow lingered, her bond kept her free, and her attorney's sleek SUV was a regular sight in her driveway. I needed more than camera footage to end this. My lawyer, Elliot, a wiry man with a knack for spotting financial discrepancies, suggested we dig into the HOA's records. Karen's illegal $3,500 gate blocking my creek access had been funded somehow, and Elliot suspected it wasn't her personal cash. We subpoenaed the HOA's financials, expecting a quick answer. What we found was a labyrinth of deceit that made my vandalized beehive look trivial. The gate's payment traced a cashier's check signed by Chandler Hayes, drawn from the HOA's reserve account, a fund meant for emergencies like storm repairs, not Karen's land grabs. Elliot's team dug deeper, unearthing a trail of checks totaling $46,900, all penned by Chandler, the HOA's volunteer bookkeeper. These were labeled grounds improvements, new benches, a community gazebo that never materialized. Neighbors whispered about Chandler's flashy new truck, incongruous with his part-time mechanic job, but no one had connected the dots until now. The HOA board, a mix of retirees and overworked parents, was horrified. At an emergency meeting in the community center, I watched their faces pale as Elliot presented the evidence, scanned checks, bank statements, and a timeline of withdrawals. Mrs. Larson, a board member who'd once baked me cookies, clutched her pearls. "We trusted Chandler," she said, voice trembling. "He brought donuts to meetings." The board voted unanimously to press charges, their shock morphing into resolve. Karen, absent from the meeting, sent a curt email claiming ignorance. Detective Miriam Page from the county's white-collar crime unit took the case with a predator's focus. She seized Chandler's home computer, a dusty tower in his cluttered duplex, and found a digital goldmine, forged receipts for non-existent landscaping, fake meeting minutes approving projects, and a Word template for neon green approval stamps used on fraudulent invoices. Most damning were bank records showing $12,000 funneled to Karen's personal account, labeled consulting fees for services no one could verify. Page's report noted Karen's signature on several HOA documents, tying her directly to the scheme. I stood by my creek that evening, the water's gurgle blending with the bees' hum, and felt a surge of vindication. My sculpture, battered but unbowed, seemed to gleam brighter, pixel-nosed a fallen leaf, her tail wagging. This wasn't just about my land anymore, it was about a community betrayed by two opportunists who thought they were untouchable. Karen lawyered up fast. Her attorney, James Hall, charged $600 an hour and deflected questions with practiced arrogance. My client is a victim of Mr. Hayes' actions, he told Page, ignoring the bank transfers. Chandler, however, was sinking, facing new felony charges, embezzlement, forgery, and a probation revocation for his 2021 check-kiting scheme. He had no leverage. In a jailhouse interview, his eyes sunken, he agreed to testify against Karen in exchange for a plea deal. She promised me a cut of the land, he mumbled, staring at the table, said the HOA could annex it. Elliot warned me the legal road ahead would be long, but small wins kept me grounded. The HOA, scrambling to restore trust, issued me a $4,500 check from Chandler's frozen assets to repair my beehive and fence. I used it to rebuild the apiary, the new frame smelling of fresh cedar, and to polish my sculpture, its dent's now a badge of survival. Neighbors stopped by offering coffee and apologies. We should have questioned Karen sooner, Mrs. Larson said, her eyes wet. As September's first chill settled in, I walked the creek path, the surveyor's stake still intact, Nora's placards fluttering in the breeze. The community buzzed with gossip. Karen's house was up for sale, her HOA influence shattered. My cameras stayed on, their red lights winking in the dusk. Chandler's betrayal had cracked the case open, and Karen's lies were crumbling. I wasn't just fighting for my land anymore. I was helping unravel a web that had snared us all. The sculpture, my quiet rebellion, stood tall, and I knew the next battle was coming. 6 months after the HOA's financial unraveling, I sat in a packed courtroom, the air thick with anticipation and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. My metal beehive sculpture, now polished to a gleam despite its battle scars, waited back home by the creek, a silent witness to the war that had led me here. Pixel, fully healed, napped in my truck outside, her leash ready for a celebratory walk. Today, Karen Davis and Chandler Hayes would face the consequences of their crimes, and I was ready to see justice served. The trial had been a slog, weeks of motions, depositions, and Karen's attorney, James Hall, spinning tales of her innocence. But the evidence was a tidal wave. Chandler, desperate to shave years off his sentence, took the stand first. In a gray jumpsuit, his voice low, he detailed Karen's scheme. She'd masterminded the land grab, promising him a slice of my property if the HOA annexed it. She said it was a done deal, he muttered, eyes on the floor. I forged the gate approval, moved the money, did the dirty work. His testimony was a wrecking ball, dismantling Karen's victim act. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lena Torres, played my Ring camera footage on a courtroom screen. The grainy video showed Karen and Chandler at 12:47 a.m. loading rebar into her SUV, the timestamp matching the night Nora's survey stakes vanished. Karen's platinum blonde hair glowed under the moonlight, unmistakable. The jury leaned forward, some jotting notes. Torres followed with bank records, $12,000 in consulting fees to Karen, and Chandler's forged HOA documents, their neon green stamps glaringly fake. My dented sculpture, mentioned in the vandalism charges, became a symbol of their greed. Karen took the stand last, her tailored blazer a stark contrast to Chandler's jail garb. She claimed ignorance, blaming Chandler for everything. I trusted him with the HOA books, she said, voice quavering, but Torres dismantled her, pointing to her signature on fraudulent minutes. The jury wasn't buying it. After 3 hours of deliberation, they returned, guilty on all counts: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. The sentencing hearing was a week later in early March, the courtroom colder, the crowd thinner. Chandler, facing probation revocation for his 2021 fraud, got 4 years for the new charges, with parole eligibility in 2, plus an 18-month sentence for violating probation. He nodded silently, resigned. Karen's fate was harsher. The judge, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses, revoked her bond, citing her orchestration of a calculated scheme. She got 18 months in prison, $32,000 restitution to me for damages to my fence, beehive, and sculpture, and $46,900 to the HOA for embezzled funds. A 5-year no-contact order would keep her away post-release. As the gavel fell, Corinne's eyes met mine, her face a mask of fury and defeat. I gave her a polite wave, not out of spite, but because it felt like turning a page. The sculpture, my battered emblem of resistance, had outlasted her. Outside, I hugged Elliot, who'd fought tirelessly, and thanked Tors. "You made my job easy with those cameras," she said, smiling. The community exhaled. Neighbors texted updates. Corinne's house, still for sale, had a price-reduced sign. The HOA sent a formal apology promising reforms. I walked the creek that evening, Pixel darting through the grass, the water's murmur blending with the bees' hum. My sculpture caught the sunset, its dents glowing like metals. The $4,500 from Chandler's assets had rebuilt my apiary, and I'd added a small plaque to the sculpture. Resilient 2025. It felt right. Deputy Rogers stopped by the next day, his cruiser idling. He'd been watching Corinne long before my 911 call, he admitted, thanks to her HOA bullying. "You just gave us the evidence to nail her," he said, tipping his hat. I offered him honey from the new hive, and he grinned. "Keep that sculpture standing." Closure wasn't just the verdict, it was the quiet of my land, the weight lifted. Corinne and Chandler's downfall was a community victory, but mine was personal. The creek flowed free, Pixel ran, and my art endured. I was ready for whatever came next. 3 months after Corinne and Chandler's convictions, in the soft warmth of June, my property felt like a sanctuary reclaimed. The metal beehive sculpture, its dents now polished into a story of survival, stood proudly by the porch, catching the morning light like a beacon. Pixel, my border collie, raced along the creek, her black and white fur a blur, fully recovered from the nailbird incident. The bees hummed in their rebuilt hives, their wings a gentle chorus against the water's murmur. Corinne's shadow, once a suffocating weight, had faded, and I was ready to rebuild, not just my land but my peace. The HOA, shaken by Chandler's embezzlement and Corinne's tyranny, had undergone a quiet revolution. A new board led by Mrs. Larson and a young accountant named Priya prioritized transparency. They mailed me a formal apology, typed on crisp letterhead, acknowledging Corinne's abuse of power. Enclosed was a $4,500 check drawn from Chandler's seized assets to repair my vandalized beehive, fence, and sculpture. "We're starting over," Mrs. Larson wrote in a handwritten note. "Thank you for standing up." I framed the note, hanging it in my kitchen next to a photo of Pixel by the creek. The money went to work immediately. I rebuilt the apiary, stacking new cedar frames that filled the air with a sweet, woody scent. The bees, resilient as ever, settled in, their honey production stronger than before. I repaired the fence, reinforcing it with sturdy posts, and gave the sculpture a fresh coat of sealant, its hexagons gleaming like armor. But the real transformation was the greenhouse. Where Corinne's illegal gate once stood, I erected a glass-and wood structure, its panels fogging with condensation as I planted tomatoes, basil, and lavender inside. The greenhouse smelled of damp soil and promise, a defiant reclaiming of the land she'd tried to steal. Building it wasn't easy. I spent weekends hammering beams, my hands blistered, sweat stinging my eyes. Pixel supervised, napping in the shade or chasing butterflies that fluttered near the creek. Neighbors stopped by, curious, their visits a sign of the community's thaw. Mr. Tors, a retired carpenter, lent me his level and shared stories of Corinne's HOA reign, fines for unpruned shrubs, threats over holiday lights. "We were too scared to fight her," he admitted, shaking his head. "You changed that." His words warmed me more than the June sun. The greenhouse became my sanctuary, a place to heal. I'd sit inside, pruning tomato vines, and think of the sculpture outside, my front yard art that had sparked this war. Its dents, once a reminder of vandalism, now symbolized endurance. I sketched plans for a new piece, a wind chime shaped like bees in flight to hang by the creek. The land dispute, once a daily battle, felt like a distant memory, buried under fresh soil and new growth. The community, too, was blooming. The HOA's new board hosted open meetings, live-streamed for accountability. Priya posted budgets online, every cent tracked. Neighbors, once silenced by Corinne's clipboard, spoke up, suggesting a dog park, a community garden. The for sale sign on Corinne's house, now weathered, drew whispers of hope. "Maybe someone nice will move in," Mrs. Larson said over coffee. I nodded, sipping, but kept my cameras on. Trust was earned, not assumed. Deputy Rogers drove by one afternoon, his cruiser slowing as he waved. He'd been watching Corinne long before my fight, he'd told me, fielding complaints about her HOA scams. My evidence had given him the leverage to act. "You did us all a favor," he said, eyeing the greenhouse. I offered him a jar of honey, and he grinned, tucking it into his pocket. "Keep that sculpture standing." As summer deepened, I walked the creek path, Nora's survey stakes still firm, their orange tips peeking through wildflowers. Pixel darted ahead, splashing in the shallows. The greenhouse glowed in the dusk, its glass reflecting the bees' hum. The $4,500 had rebuilt more than my property. It had restored my faith in second chances. Karen's prison sentence and Chandler's plea were victories, but this new roots, new neighbors, new art was life. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was growing. A year after Karen's imprisonment, in the crisp bloom of April 2026, my land felt like a chapter closed and a new one begun. The metal beehive sculpture, its dense, now cherished scars, stood by the porch, glinting under a sky streaked with dawn's pinks. Pixel, my border collie, chased bees carefully at a distance, along the creek, her tail a metronome of joy. The greenhouse thrived, its tomato vines heavy with fruit, and my new bee-shaped wind chime, hung by the water, tinkled in the breeze. Karen's defeat had left peace in its wake, but life, as always, had one more twist. A letter arrived, postmarked from a nearby town, from Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin and heir. She insisted Karen had granted her a private right-of-way across my land, enclosing a photocopied deed that looked legitimate at a glance. My stomach tightened. Another fight. I called Elliot, my lawyer, who spotted the forgery immediately. The notary seal was outdated, the parcel number off by a digit. Nora Beltran, my surveyor, confirmed it with her records, her voice crackling over the phone. "They didn't even try to hide it," she said, laughing. "We filed a cease and desist, and Elaine withdrew her claim before the court date, her letter of retraction curt and unsigned." Neighbors, now vigilant after Karen's scams, had tipped off the sheriff about Elaine's inquiries, proving the community was watching as closely as Deputy Rogers once had. The ordeal, brief but sharp, reminded me of Karen's tenacity, even from behind bars, yet it also showed how far we'd come. I walked the creek that evening, Pixel splashing in the shallows, the wind chime's soft notes blending with the bees' hum. The sculpture, my front yard art, stood firm, its hexagons reflecting the fading light. I'd fought for this land, and no forged deed could shake that. Then came a surprise, a letter from Chandler Hayes, sent from the state prison. Written in neat, slanted script, it was an apology. I was desperate, and Karen used that, he wrote. "I'm sorry for the hive, your dog, all of it." He'd earned a paralegal certificate, he said, and enclosed a hand-drawn map suggesting orchard placements for my property, apple and pear trees along the creek. The sketch was meticulous, with notes on soil pH and sunlight. I read it twice, torn between skepticism and a strange pang of empathy. Chandler had been Karen's pawn, his choices costly but not irredeemable. I sat in the greenhouse, the air thick with basil's peppery scent, and wrote back. "Sunflowers are taller this year," I said, keeping it brief. "No promises, but thanks for the map." Forgiveness wasn't easy, but his gesture felt like a thread of something human, something worth acknowledging. I tucked the map in a drawer, not ready to plant, but not ready to discard it either. Restitution checks began arriving from the state's crime victim fund. Small sums from Karen's prison wages, $58 a month, a trickle against the $32,000 she owed me. The symbolism mattered more than the math. Each check was a reminder of her accountability. The HOA, now thriving under Priya's leadership, sent updates. Karen's house had sold to a young couple planning a vegetable patch. "No more HOAs for them," Priya joked at a meeting. I stood by the sculpture one morning, its steel warm under my hand, and felt the weight of the past year lift. Pixel nuzzled my leg, her eyes bright. The creek flowed, the greenhouse glowed, and the wind chime sang. Elaine's scam had fizzled, Chandler's letter had surprised, and Karen's debt, however slowly, was being paid. The community, once fractured, was knitting itself back together, and I was part of that weave. This wasn't just my victory, it was the land's, the bees, the neighbors. The sculpture, battered but enduring, marked the spot where I stood my ground. As spring deepened, I planned a new hive, its frames ready for a summer swarm. Life circled back, not to conflict, but to growth. By the spring of 2027, the scars of Karen's reign had begun to fade, replaced by something vibrant. My property, once a battleground, now bloomed with life. The metal beehive sculpture, its dense a proud patina, stood sentinel by the porch, its hexagons glinting in the April sun. Pixel, my border collie, darted along the creek, splashing through shallows where Nora's survey stake still held firm. The greenhouse thrived, its basil and tomatoes perfuming the air, and the bee-shaped wind chime sang softly in the breeze. But the real transformation was happening across the street, on Karen's former land, where a new chapter was taking root. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, had bought Karen's property at a discount. Her for sale sign, weathered and leaning, finally came down in January. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen, who'd wielded HOA rules like a scepter to control her neighbors, had lost her land to a group dedicated to community and growth. Sprout Tomorrow's director, a wiry woman named Clara with soil-stained hands, knocked on my door one chilly morning. "We're planting a pollinator garden," she said, eyes bright. "Your bees inspired us. Will you consult?" I laughed, half disbelieving. The land Karen tried to annex was now a canvas for my passion. I agreed, sharing tips on native plants, butterfly weed, coneflower, milkweed, that would draw bees and monarchs. Clara's team mapped out raised beds, a compost hub, and a trellis for climbing beans, all on the lawn where Karen once scolded kids for stray soccer balls. The community buzzed with excitement, neighbors who'd once ducked Karen's clipboard now signing up to volunteer. Priya, the HOA's new chair, posted flyers, her accountant's precision giving way to a gardener's zeal. "This is our land now," she told me, grinning. The first volunteer day in mid-April was a festival of sweat and hope. I brought my brush cutter, its blade whirring as I cleared overgrown patches where Karen's gate posts had once stood. Pixel bounded between workers, her tail a white flag of joy. Deputy Rogers showed up, his sheriff's hat swapped for a faded baseball cap, hauling sacks of mulch. "Figured I'd pitch in," he said, wiping his brow. He'd been watching Karen long before my fight, he reminded me, and this garden felt like his victory too. "She'd hate this," he added, chuckling, nodding at the beds replacing her manicured grass. New HOA members, including Mr. Torres the carpenter, joined in, hammering trellises and swapping stories of Karen's reign, fines for unapproved birdhouses, glares at barbecues. "You took her down," Mr. Torres said, clapping my shoulder. I shrugged, pointing to my sculpture across the street. "That did." Its dents, visible from the garden, were a quiet testament to the war we'd won. We planted tomato vines, zucchini, and rows of sunflowers, their seeds a nod to Chandler's prison letter. The air smelled of turned earth, sweat, and possibility. Clara led a workshop on composting, her voice carrying over the chatter. Kids from the neighborhood, once banned from Karen's lawn, ran through the beds, tossing dirt clods and giggling. Mrs. Larson, her pearls swapped for a straw hat, knelt beside me, planting lavender. "This feels right," she said, her hands trembling with purpose. I nodded, my own hands caked with soil, the same soil I'd defended. By dusk, the garden was taking shape, raised beds framed, trellises sturdy, wildflowers dotting the edges. My bees, drawn by the activity, hummed nearby, their presence a bridge between my land and this new one. The sculpture watched from afar, its steel catching the sunset's glow. Karen's control, once ironclad, had been uprooted, replaced by roots that would feed us all. As we packed up, Clara handed me a jar of last year's honey from her own hives, a thank you for my help. Rogers lingered, eyeing the beds. "Community's tougher than she thought," he said. I agreed, thinking of the neighbors who tipped off the sheriff about Elaine's scam. We were watching now, just as Rogers had watched Karen. The garden wasn't just land, it was redemption. Where Karen's gate had divided, we built beds to unite. Where her rules had stifled, we planted freedom. I walked home, Pixel at my side, the wind chimes notes fading into the night. The sculpture stood tall, its story etched in every dent. This was our victory, and it tasted like spring. In October 2027, Sprout Tomorrow hosted a harvest dinner on Karen's former land, now a thriving garden. Tables lined the raised beds, laden with roasted butternut squash, honey-glazed carrots, and heirloom tomato bruschetta, all grown steps from my greenhouse. The air carried laughter and the tang of fresh herbs, a stark contrast to the tension of years past. My beehive sculpture, its dents glowing in the twilight, watched from across the street, a quiet guardian of this new era. Neighbors clinked glasses, toasting the garden's bounty. Clara, Sprout Tomorrow's director, gave me a nod, crediting my bees for the pollinators' hum. I shrugged, warmth spreading through me. The real victory was this, nourishment where Karen's control once festered. Pixel weaved through the crowd, stealing a carrot from a kid's plate, her eyes bright. I'd built a barn that summer, using wood reclaimed from Karen's old gate, its permit proudly filed. The structure, sturdy and cedar-scented, housed tools and dreams of new hives. It stood where her fence had divided, a testament to resilience. My wind chime sang by the creek, blending with the bees' hum. The sculpture, my front yard art, anchored it all, its steel a story of battles won. The community, once fractured, was whole. Neighbors who'd tipped off the sheriff about Elaine's scam now shared recipes, their vigilance a quiet echo of Rogers' watch on Karen. Karen's debt lingered, but my peace was complete. Pixel raced the fields, and I tended the greenhouse, planting for tomorrow. This land, once a war zone, now fed us all, and that was enough.